the other question I had for you specifically, Mads, was Yann LeCun's world models, and just to share a little bit more, because we're starting to see more noise. Obviously, he's been poaching, and the great shuffle of team members, and we saw Thinking Machines. There was a whole shuffle over at Mira Murati's bunch. But Yann LeCun, world models, what are they, and why do they matter?
So as we think about the evolution of AI over the last decade, I mean, we've gone from kind of big data and data science to machine learning to deep learning. And then suddenly there's this whole explosion of generative models, right? Where we found out how to make the deep learning models create new content and generate new content. The challenge is, even if you have the best LLM, even if you have Opus 4.5, Anthropic's flagship model, it still doesn't really understand how the world works. I mean, it'll understand the words, but it can't navigate a room. It doesn't understand intuitively how physics work or how a ball would bounce. It can probably recite all Newton's laws to you, but if it observes them in practice, it doesn't mean anything to it because it doesn't have a notion of space. And so world models, what are they? Well, that's the next generation paradigm, right? If you've got something that understands all the words, and we're saying that's you take that to the nth degree, it'll understand all the words. Well, the next thing then becomes, how can you understand the space around you? Not just the words, but what they mean in real life. And so world models, they are that frontier. And they're interesting because everybody's talking about them. They're also interesting because they mean different things to different people. So you've seen the video generators that are all around predicting what things look like. So things like Sora and Veo that can create beautiful, movie-like things. Right? Some people would say that's a world model. I'd contest that, but for some people are saying it is. You've got interactive simulators like Genie that will respond to action. So it's still a pixel by pixel model, right? It's still a model that understands things visually as opposed to really have a proper spatial intelligence, but it'll create a world you can move around in. So in Genie, which is one of DeepMind's models, you're in a world and you can provide input to the model and it'll move you around in the world and generate what you see. Move right, move left. What do I observe based on where I go? And it does that without an understanding of physics. It just knows that this is probably what happens if you walk left or if you fly forward or if you fly up or down in this world. And then you have the what you can call sort of the physics engines. Those are things like Isaac Sim from Nvidia and others that actually understand physics. Okay, so they have a physics model of how does the world really work. But Isaac Sim can't perceive things from cameras. Isaac Sim doesn't have a visual understanding of the world. It knows physics. It can say if a ball is this big and it flies at this pace, etc., then it should end up over there. It'll move in this way. And then you have this fourth generation, fourth category, these latent world models. And that's where LeCun comes in. His model is called Jeppa, that are trying to predict in an abstract space what will happen if something does X. For example, if the robot picks up the ball and drops it, what's going to happen? If the robot turns over the hand and pours out the liquid, what's going to happen? How's that going to impact things? It's super interesting. Jeppa have taken a dramatically different way to learning than NVIDIA's models, for example. So they're also using video to learn, and they can use that to predict the ball trajectory, and they've done it without labeling the data. So lots and lots of new things they're creating here. One of the comparisons they did was they said, well, if we have a robot and we try to take pick and place, right? So I want this robot to pick up an object and then put it somewhere else. Can I get it to do that right? And it was able to do that in 80% of situations, whereas a similar model from NVIDIA was not able to do that, despite the Jeppa model being trained on many, many fewer GPU hours a year. So there's some interesting things they're building here. That's really what it's all about. It's this world model, understanding the world and using it in robotics and physical AI.
Well, he's definitely an interesting character, and I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see how this all unfolds and what other models are going to come online and how they're all going to interconnect. It feels like they're going to be a blend, which is going to create maybe if we get to AGI SI.
Well, I've said for a long time, I think that the LLMs are just the tip of the iceberg, and much smarter people than me were crowing about how LLMs were going to become super AI, AGI, and I never understood why or how. I just including people who are far more technically adept than I am when it comes to the nitty-gritty of AI. It just doesn't make sense. When you think about how a child learns, they don't learn language first and then learn about the world. They learn about the world around them, and then they learn language afterwards. Our brains then use that as a communication layer to help define the world. But first of all, we experience the world physically. So there's no question in my mind that this next generation of companies and the R&D that's going on, if it is within the OpenAIs and elsewhere, will be the next step change. And I think it does still mean potentially that the current generation of LLMs is the search the search destination site analogy, the Yahoos and the hotbots. I don't think we've seen the Google come along yet in AI, because however hard you try, you're not going to match word pattern recognition and probability to the complexities of the world, the physical world we experience. And so that needs to be grown from the causal dynamics of the environment we live in, the sensory data, and not just actually from observations, but actually evolving and thinking in response to interventions within the physical world. And that's where it gets really, really exciting. And I think we'll see some really interesting technology be built over the next 5 years, and it will not be LLM.
I think this is where you're absolutely right, Andrew. And I think this is where people get confused, is they see what, Opus can do, right, with Claude Code, and you give it tasks and it'll go off and work for hours and do things that are incredibly impressive. And people will say, gosh, it's AGI's here. I can ask it to build an app, and it'll build an app, and it'll connect it up to my database, and it'll do all this stuff by itself. But ask it to get a robot to walk across the floor and pick up a ball. I mean, it won't even take the first 3 steps. It's got no idea.
But it also has no idea what it's building, really. Actually, it doesn't know what it's building.
No, I have some sympathy with people saying that, because the discussion at the beginning, right? How can LLMs be anything meaningful? They're just, stochastic machines randomly stringing together words to make up stuff, and they sometimes lie. And I think that's remarkably similar to many humans I know. Right? So
many police commissioners who were against the Maccabee trial. There's a made-up football match. I think the police commissioners fighting in court.
But I think that the key thing here is, when we talk about AGI, right? I mean, for me, you cannot have AGI if you don't have an understanding of the world. And there's no LLM that will ever get that understanding of how the world really works. And therefore, there'll be no AGI in 2026, is what we spoke about on the pod a couple of weeks ago. It's further away.